So for those of you who are in the discussion that Nancy and I held yesterday, we talked about Digital Trust, BC Digital Trust, and some of the initiatives we're doing. We're going to do a quick recap of what we talked about yesterday to get some of you who might not have been in the room up to speed. And then what we're going to talk about today is, you can see my slide up there. My name is AI Generated Digital Trust in the Age of AI, and we're going to talk about things like, we're going to lean into authenticity and just a couple of concepts around how AI and the technology interacts with ours. So what we're doing at BC Digital Trust is we are working to empower citizens and businesses to easily and securely prove who they are online and in person. And I'll talk a little bit about a couple use cases that we have today that are live and in production. We mentioned we have a use case that we're working out with City of Vancouver right now, and a couple other ones that are en route. But the really important thing to note, if you want to take anything out of this, is that our technology works, it's in place, and people are using it today in British Columbia. And what's really important about our technology is it allows for confidentiality, so that is direct connections between parties that are secure and private. We have authenticity, and I mentioned at the start that this is about knowing that the person you're dealing with or the organization you're dealing with is who they say they are. And in an increasingly digital world, and in a world with AI, it is very important to have that authenticity. Next, we have privacy. And we can talk to you about zero knowledge proofs and sharing only the information you want to share with other parties. But our technology allows for that, and we can give you a couple examples as we move forward. Then finally, efficiency or value. And the technology we're building through BC Wallet, Hyperledger Aries Acapay, all of those things that we're doing is allowing for improved efficiency for British Columbians as they interact in person and online. So you heard in our introduction, there's myself, Aaron Unger, with the Ministry of Citizen Services, Digital Identity and Trust Program. We've got John Jordan, and we've got Nancy Norris, Energy and Mines. And you'll note Nancy's in a different ministry than John and I. Her team is building the exact same style of solution, same style of technology, but her solution, her work is towards organizations and an organizational cloud-based wallet, and she'll talk about that in a minute. What John and I are doing with Digital Trust is building out solutions for individuals, and we're doing that in a couple of really unique ways. You'll note up on the screen, we've got a nice little graphic on the left. We talk about credentials can be used to access information. So in a traditional model for accessing information, we'd all have a username, password, or we'd present a physical ID to access a building, that sort of thing. We can use digital credentials to allow individuals to access sites, digital or in person. We can work with legislated bodies to issue credentials to allow people to prove things about themselves. We can allow individuals with credentials to sign something or attest to something. And then we can allow for secure messaging between parties. So once I've established a connection between myself and Nancy on our wallet, we can send secure messages back and forth that cannot be intercepted or mimicked or anything like that. We have a secure connection, and Nancy and I would be glad to do a demo for anybody afterwards. We can do about a 2-second demo and show how smooth the messaging is back and forth between our wallets. We have a couple of really great teams within Digital Trust. So we've got Nancy's Energy and Mines Digital Trust team, which she'll tell us about in a couple of minutes. We've also got the BC Wallet team, and the BC Wallet is an app. We've built it in-house. You can go to the App Store and download it today, although you won't have too much use for it yet, but you can play around with it. We can get you some fake credentials, and you can do a showcase that we can teach you about. But that's essentially our method for issuing credentials to individuals so that they can interact in this digital economy. And then the second thing, and I'm going to lean on Emiliano if anybody asks any hard questions, Emiliano's one of our lead developers, is Traction. which is a front end for Akapai, which essentially is all of the open source software that supports our technology. And there's a lot of pieces to that, but Traction is a developer-friendly experience where anyone can work through issuance, holding all kinds of different credential experiences, and it allows for a really smooth process. So it's a front end, again, to our more technical processes, and we have a sandbox that gets wiped the 1st and the 15th of any month, and people can go into that sandbox and play around with the technology a little bit. Finally, one of the best parts of our technology is Orgbook BC, and I know this is something John has been working on for a lot of years, and I asked this yesterday, but who in the room has used Orgbook before? Okay. Orgbook's a searchable public directory. It provides verified and trustworthy data about BC organizations from BC registries. It's got an open API. It's part of the BC data catalog, and it's a really great resource if you're trying to identify information about businesses in BC. I'm going to pass it over to Nancy, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion once she's done, and then we'll take some questions.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so the project that I am running is called Energy and Mines Digital Trust. Aaron mentioned a bit about it. And basically what we're doing is using all of the technology that Aaron and John's team have built and are offering out to different ministries in the government. And we're applying it in a very particular use case, which is enabling mines in the province to exchange data using digital credentials in a way that's much more efficient and trusted. Particularly, we've got 2 use cases that we've been working on, one of which is actually in production as of yesterday, which is super exciting, where my ministry, Ministry of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, as the legislated entity with the authority to issue Mines Act permits to mines to operate, we can now do that using a digital credential to the Mines Enterprise digital wallet. So some of the ways that doing these use cases, we've realized in talking to stakeholders that this improves process efficiency for mines. It increases trust and security in that they know exactly who's issued the credential to them, and they're able to share it in a way that's also very secure and trusted. You may think, okay, a Mines Act permit is a publicly available document, which is true. This is sort of a foundational use case for us to test out what we're able to do with the technology. And it actually has really interesting application for supply chain traceability. So there's more and more legislation in consuming economies like the US and the EU around traceability of the entire supply chain for products that enter their markets, and being able to prove out that those products at no stage along the supply chain was there forced or child labor used. And also a lot of other sustainability claims that the products are made about the product. So we're finding that digital credentials actually have a really interesting application there, because we've partnered also with the Mining Association of Canada that has a sustainability report that all of their members have to provide to them on an annual basis. And so by creating a digital credential version of that report, the holder of the credential, the mine, has the proof that that credential was issued by a trusted authority, a certifier, or in the case of the Mines Act permit, by the ministry of the government that has the legislated authority to issue it. And then when they're sharing that information with a downstream supply chain actor, say, there's a very high level of trust and security that that information was indeed issued by the trusted authority. In this case, either the certifier for the sustainability information or the government for the permit information. So it's a very interesting technology in that sense, and we're finding that it has multiple different advantages, particularly in the world of AI. So we've been, based on this work, we've been asked and are now leading a project with the UN around supply chain traceability. Again, this is using the work that we've done in BC and basically documenting it and expanding it out in a global context. So the technology that we're using, verified credentials, it's not just for a mining supply chain where it could be applicable, but it's also very highly applicable for other supply chains as well, like textiles and leather goods, which this group at the UN has just completed a pilot around as well, and agri-food. Any supply chain where you're trying to prove out that the actors along that supply chain have acted in a sustainable way.
Thanks, Nancy. So, Nancy, I didn't give Nancy's team appropriate credit. Nancy's team actually built Traction, and then we've leveraged it on Digital Trust on both our projects. I just think that's important. We didn't put up our ecosystem slide today, and I don't know if anybody saw it yesterday, and we can show it later, or we can provide some handouts. But in both cases, in Nancy's mining use case and in our BC Wallet use cases, we are trying to build ecosystems. And right now, with BC Digital Trust, we have a lawyer credential being issued by the Law Society of BC. And the way that gets issued is the Law Society of BC is legislated to control who is a lawyer in the province. Their members log into their portal using their username password, and they're given a credential that says, yes, this is Aaron Unger, he's a practicing lawyer, here's your Law Society credential, and they put it into the member's BC wallet. That member then goes to Service BC and leverages their BC Services Card application. Does anybody have a BC Services Card app? They use their verification process in that app to then get a person credential. And with those two credentials, the lawyer then has the ability to prove that they are who they say they are from BC Services Card app, and they've been vetted by a real person. Does everybody remember that process, getting vetted or verified? You can send in a video, you can record a video, or you can go in person, and it takes about 15 minutes, and you look left and you look right, and you say a couple things, and somebody says yes, and you hold up your ID, and yes, this is a person or not. They take that credential, they take their Law Society credential, and they go and they access 4 different sites. So right now they're accessing a Ministry of Attorney General site called Access to Court Materials. They're accessing the Okanagan Correction Center, and then we're working on a couple new use cases as well. And what's happening in each of those use cases that I didn't describe very well yesterday is Access to Core Materials, the Ministry of Attorney General site, is saying, yes, I trust that Aaron is who he is, who he says he is, and yes, I trust that he's a lawyer, but they're really saying they trust the Law Society of BC and Service BC to have identified me as such. And that's a really important distinction. Service BC doesn't know, and the Law Society of BC doesn't know that I have taken my credential to those sites. And it's decentralized that identity. So all of that being said, I'm gonna hand it over to John with a couple of questions, if that's okay. So John, hearing Nancy and I talk about our services, where do you see risks in our digital age with AI and how it relates to what we're doing?
Sure. I'm on the mic, yeah. So I'm John Jordan. I'm the executive director of this organization, and I've been working on this effort since 2016 here in BC, but I also worked with open data way back since 2007. I worked at the Government of Canada, and I don't know if folks were aware of the open contracting data that Government of Canada publishes, but we built a site that has now been replaced by some big an open source site that was very user-friendly, now replaced by some big, outsourced thing. Anyway, so a long history in open data, and sort of wanted to talk a little bit about the integrity of that data and sort of talk a little bit about some of the risks that we see. None of us here are experts in AI, by the way. So we just sort of wanted to raise some questions and some areas that we'll have to look into as government as we're responsible for these very important processes. For example, Aaron brought up, personal identity, legal entity identity, verifying that firms and people are behaving in appropriate ways according to regulations. I've done a search of the BC. BC publishes all its laws in a XML parsable format, which is really handy. Before I had this accident a few years ago, I did some queries, and lately one of our team members who helped build a query for me, and the query looked at the definition section of all the acts in BC and looked for the phrase means a person. Okay, so means a person refers to both natural, people like us and legal entities. Those are both persons in the law. Those are 900 occurrences of the phrase means a person. And when that happens, it means that the government is responsible for doing something to know that the individual or the entity that's being regulated is in fact who they say they are. And the sort of questions that start to arise is, well, how can I know that, especially digitally, right? So right now we have our service card service, which every 5 years you go in. I actually just went in a few days ago, last Friday. It was time to renew my picture and so forth. Shockingly, when I had this accident, I got a letter saying my license had been revoked. And when my wife showed it to me, I was like, wow, what's happened? And then I realized, oh yeah. Sorry, not able to drive anymore, but I had to go in and get my picture renewed. And so that's where we introduce the integrity into the process, right? So we take a picture, facial recognition is done against a whole set of other pictures to make sure there's not two faces that are different associated to the same identity data, so forth and so on. So that's good. We then put that into a database. We have this app, which is really nice app. It's very helpful for me and helpful for many, many British Columbians. And one of the ways we do our best to ensure that that app is activated by the right person is, like Aaron said, we allow you to do a video verification. Well, guess what? Face masking is coming soon. And it's the ability for bad actors to, in real time, basically skin their face with your face. Now, I'm not an expert on that area or whatnot, but talking to a few people who are, it's like this is a real threat. It's happening with voice right now. Voice is much easier. They only need 3 seconds of your voice to be able to emulate it. And I gather, like one of the experts we were talking to, actually from FutureWay, which is the research and development arm of Huawei, in Asia, payments are often digital. There's a lot of payment digitally. And so bad actors are calling up and pretending to be, the grandson or the granddaughter or whatever, saying, they need some money, and it sounds like them. And because they're on social media, they can say, oh yeah, like I'm, visiting Thailand or whatever, and I lost my wallet and my passport and I need $100 or $1,000. And so these are threats that are happening today. So that's a threat to the integrity of the sort of foundational aspects of what government's responsible for. Probably going on along here. So that's one example. And that speaks to the inputs, right? So how do we protect the inputs as government? Because if we don't protect the inputs, well, the outputs are unreliable. So if we're impersonating people or impersonating organizations, then like the example Nancy talked about, well, how do we protect the integrity of supply chain from, say, counterfeit goods or goods that are not sourced appropriately and so forth. So there's a few examples of AI. I don't know if it went off script, but
That was better
I
than
just make it up as I go.
Um, I'm going to pass it over to Nancy now. Nancy, can you talk about the importance of authenticity in your mining ecosystem?
I think John put it really well. I think if, for our project, we're trying to enable BC businesses, in our case mining operators, to differentiate their products in global markets and to prove out with integrity that they're mining in a way that has strong laws and is being done to global sustainability standards. And to have the ability of the technology to protect that data and to link it back to the organization that operates the mine it's a very important part of the use case and the purpose of what we're trying to do.
Awesome. That's great, Nancy. Thank you. John, so you kind of led into this, but I know you've always got a really good answer for this. So this is maybe a loaded question, and we will take questions from the audience too. But John, can you talk about what can we do to improve the services we offer as a government in this space?
A big open question. So, I mean, what we are doing today, like, let's sort of park the issue of protecting the integrity of the inputs. The integrity of the inputs are the best that we can do today. We think they're quite strong. And so we've, like Aaron was talking about, we've built a number of services that are relying upon a new capability that is all based on, like, all open source. So all of the work we've been doing for the last 7 years has been in the open and contributed to an international effort under the Linux Foundation called Hyperledger. We've been helping, build the specifications and build the exemplar software and putting it into action. It's in use. The core product that we've been working on has about 100 contributors over the last 4 years. Emiliano is one of those. It's being deployed by organizations from the UN to startups that we've helped fund, not fund, but provided their start off, because we have a really neat procurement system in British Columbia called Code With Us. So that's an ability for the government to say, hey, we have this problem. We can describe the problem really well, but we need your help. It can go up to $70,000 Canadian. And the results are code that we merge into into the repositories that we're doing. And there's been at least, 3 or 4 companies that actually have decided to go to start because their first paid job was a British Columbia Code With Us. So we see that as a real win. I'm losing track of the question.
No, that was really good. I talked about just
Yeah, how are we improving services?
improve as a government.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of this is meaning that we can provide British Columbians and Canadians and organizations around the world that adopt this the ability to add, these qualities to their interactions between people and between organizations and between government and business and so forth. All of those interactions, which is have those qualities of confidentiality, authenticity, privacy, and security. And the other quality that I wanted to add to this, and we're talking a lot about this with our team and with government, is, inclusivity. So I kind of call it ICAPS. And I bring up inclusivity because we often get questions like, what if they don't have a phone? And it was talked about a little bit before, in the talk before lunch. And, these are issues that we're dealing with. And, just from my own perspectives, because I have a little bit of a new perspective over the last 3 years on these things, we don't have there's no one answer for this particular thing. So one thing I want to sort of put out there for food for thought is the idea that inclusivity means, in the context of the digital things that we're doing, means that all people can do it that way. And I kind of want to challenge that a little bit because I'll take a minute to give a real world example. So I have a care worker. She comes from the Philippines. She spent 12 years working for Accenture in the Microsoft supply chain outsourcing business. So she's a pretty sophisticated user. A few weeks ago, she was telling me about a situation that happened where she let her son use her laptop to play Roblox, or Roboblox. I don't even know how to say that. I don't do games. But it's a popular game. I see it on the top of every list. So her son played Roblox, and a virus was installed on her Windows machine, even though she has virus software and so forth. And it was a remote management attack. So somehow it activates the remote management capability of the machine. It allows a bad actor to take it over. Now she noticed a little blue icon on there that was a little different, and she discovered this was happening, but the bad actors had already used her computer, opened up Microsoft Edge. Because Edge caches all of you, and like all browsers, passwords and usernames are real pain, so we cache our username passwords, right? So boom, they overtook her LinkedIn, her Facebook, and so forth, and then used that to launch crypto coin, scams and so forth and so on. But they weren't able to get into her bank account because two-factor, multi-factor authentication, she has a phone, right? That's a security measure that's very important. So thinking about that story and thinking about, this concept where there's pressure to provide services that don't use a phone, but are important and secure services like your health data and so forth. And how do we contemplate the discrepancy there? So on the one hand, there's this idea like we should make sure all services are accessible, or I shouldn't say accessible, available in the same way to all people. But on the other hand, if we don't leverage the advanced security capabilities of devices like phones and tablets, then we could be putting a great many more people in harm's way because their data could be overtaken in the way that I just talked about. So to finish that little story off, when we look at transportation, where government is obviously heavily involved and is involved in such a way as to protect citizens, right? So we regulate the routes of roads, how roads are built, speed limits, so forth and so on. And we also regulate cars and cars' safety mechanisms, and those safety mechanisms make it safer for people, right? So if they have an accident, they're less likely to be injured, so forth and so on. We don't ask car manufacturers to make cheaper cars by reducing the safety features so that people who can't afford cars, can have cars. We provide public transportation, we provide some accessible transportation. Okay, its availability isn't always so great. I understand. But what my point is being that when we look at inclusivity, we kind of zoom out and say, okay, we don't apply the same mechanisms to all people. We provide different mechanisms to all people. So I just want to kind of throw that idea out. It's not necessarily to do with AI or so forth, but it has to do with sort of a big picture of government and what I'm sort of calling like your digital well-being. Like we have a responsibility to understand AI, to understand the technologies around digital trust, to understand how data is brought into the government through our processes, how it's processed, how it's output, and its impacts on our people and our economy. So I don't know, I had that in there as something I wanted to get out regardless of the question. It's kind of like a politician, right? So anyways, just share a few stories about that and how we're trying to play in this space and help the government,
That was really good. Oh, do you want to keep going? I'm really glad John's up here because I could not say half of that and half as well. So those were the kind of the lead in. That was a few of the questions. I've got a couple other questions I could ask Nancy and John, but I was going to open it up to the floor to ask us any questions you might like.
So fantastic, awesome, love it. Verifiable identity, verifiable claims from credentialed info or credential processes. My question is generally, to what extent would you open up that ecosystem to be economically viable, or more around integrity of government services? I guess the example would be a vulnerable person, minority, presents for services. Government won't be providing those services. You might refer them to a number of providers. That person might then have to then contact those people, provide all the same information. It'd be much better to and keep integrity within the system, consistency of care and such, to have verified care providers and then have them only contact that person through the trust economy or the trust mechanism, right? And then to that extent, you would create a marketplace, and people would want to verify and want to jump through hoops to get on the marketplace. To what extent have you thought about extending it all out that way?
I love that question. Do you want? Yeah.
Sure, take a crack and I can add to it.
You might get a two-part answer. So I talked about the justice ecosystem. Nancy talked about the mining ecosystem. One of the things we did about a year ago is we leaned into service design quite heavily on our team. We did a lot of research talking to subject matter experts. I know John's quite connected around the globe. We talked to a lot of people in this space, and we quickly learned that one of the most important things we can do is not build towards specific use cases, right? Not build 50 credentials for 50 different use cases, but rather build out ecosystems. And I'm really proud of the justice ecosystem. We've got 2 credentials, and every new use case spins up really quickly. We are pursuing ecosystems in health and child and family services. And before we jump into just saying, yeah, we're going to issue a credential and it will work, I think Jamie said something really good this morning about feasible, desirable, and then I'm forgetting what the third word was. But we want to make sure that what we're building can be successful and will be successful. So we're in what our adoption cycle is called discovery in a couple of those spaces, which sounds like a really kind of a political answer, but before we commit to building anything, we want to make sure it is going to be a good path forward. And being technology experts in digital trust, we want to learn from the people in those industries specifically so that we can build in the right direction and provide a service that is beneficial to them. That was a really long-winded, we would like to, and we're trying.
Can add to a little bit, I suppose.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch, like you asked a lot. So I'll focus on I think what you're asking a little bit is like, how open is it, or how available are, for example, these credentials to others and so forth. So all the technology is open and available to anyone who wants to adopt it. So for example, City of Vancouver, we're working with in the business realm. One of the credentials that we are working with registries on issuing is called a digital business card. So that links a known, natural person to a legal entity. We're doing that with sole proprietors at first. That credential is issued by BC Registries through their trusted process into the business person's wallet, who then can present that to City of Vancouver business licensing. We don't have any involvement in that. Like, we're working with City of Vancouver because these are early adopters, but there's no integration of systems or so forth and so on. It's all done through protocols and data formats and crypto signatures that allow that integrity to be allow the verifiability of the data to be shared with the City of Vancouver without our involvement. So to that extent, it's entirely open-ended. Once you have your person credential in your wallet, you can use it anywhere that asks for it, and they're, under the law. And so it's entirely open-ended in that sense. The healthcare and sort of the social sector stuff, that's a whole other, it all works in the same way, but to address some of those concerns, like you asked about vulnerability, and so I don't know if we can talk about that after, because we have had some chats with social development and stuff. It just brings up a lot of different a lot of different, it's a very, I would say complicated, I suppose. Like there's lots of different issues there, but we'd love to be able to do that. Like I'd love to have a credential that comes from the appropriate authorities that help me in my healthcare journeys, like not having to say stuff over and over again and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's some definite spaces we're interested in collaborating with, but over time, it's just a service that will be embedded into software that makes it possible for those services to do those things. I don't know, kind of a little bit long-winded. But
That's a great question. Thanks.
any more questions? Feel free.
Hello. With the BC Digital Trust identity and credential, how are name changes or gender changes managed? Does that cause a problem, or is a person's identity their identity for life?
Great question. So once you have a credential issued from Service BC, they have a process built in. So you would go in and change your name or change your personal data. They have a revoke and reissue ability within their system. So the same way they would issue you a new BC Services card, they would digitally issue you a new credential and revoke the one they had previously issued. So, and the revocation happens in real time. So the second that they hit the revoke button, you could no longer use that old credential, and you could get a new one. And they've got a variety of scenarios. Obviously, that's a bit of a complex thing, but they've got a really great team over at Service BC who has worked through that to make sure that it's a smooth process. That's a great question. Did that answer it?
I think so. Is there a parallel with businesses who change their legal name and get credentials?
Yeah, essentially it would be replicable to the same thing. And when we turn on the digital business card, it'll be a similar process for that as well. And then the revoked credential, it would still be in an individual's wallet, but it would come across as false or whatever has been revoked. And then they would have the option to delete it from their wallet or keep it in there as an out-of-date credential.
Yeah,
Did I get that totally right?
Yeah. But one of the really great features of this technology is when we alluded to the confidential aspects, what that really means is it's a confidential connection. So there is it's like having a private VPN from the identity service or the business service or whatever service to your wallet. So for example, in the lawyer's use case, we're working with Digital Evidence Management Service, which is has to do with Crown attorneys and defense attorneys in criminal court. When the Crown adds evidence to the folio for a defense attorney's client, they'll receive a message directly to their wallet saying, there's a new thing in your folio, go check it out. And the justice team loves that idea because they know who the lawyer is and they're confident that message got to exactly that lawyer. And the lawyer can be confident that it came from Digital Evidence Management. Whereas, SMS, email, well, we all know how confident we feel about getting things from there. So this confidential connection aspect allows messages to come from Service BC or registries to say, hey, we noticed you got a name change. We've gone ahead and revoked your existing credential, and here's the new one.
Do we have one more? Okay, we'll be here in the afternoon. If anybody wants to talk to us, we're certainly happy to speak with anybody after. Thank you for your time.
I think we could have stayed for a few more questions. I think we do have one more. You know what? Go for it.
You can ask. Yeah.
What's that?
I've already accosted Aaron once already, so The BC Wallet, it's targeted towards individuals, right?
Yes.
Is it one of those, if you build it, they will come kind of things, or is it going to be compulsory? Or I'm just trying to figure out the ubiquitousness, you know what word I was targeting, so
Yeah.
that, I mean, if it's going to be widely adopted, then we can adopt it in other use cases.
Right.
If it's going to be very boutique, then maybe not, right?
So what we would like is we do have a person credential scaling plan that we're working on over the next year, and we would like to have the way I refer to it is anybody could get value from it if they choose to use it, but it won't be you shall have this no matter what kind of a solution. But what I would like to have is if you have the wallet, you get benefit out of it. Everybody in this room, if you downloaded the wallet, you would find value in having it. I don't want it to be something that is another inconvenience or another app on your phone or additional clicks.
Yeah, like we're sort of pursuing, well, we are pursuing kind of what I coin a responsible and respectful rollout. So we're working with either government services or some other services in the private sector that have that value for us to prove out that it's going to work well. It's not like we're ever going to have, signs on the side of a bus saying, get your person credential now. It's more, hey, like the lawyers, for example,